walking along a lonely trail along the roots of Pikes Peak, you think back to your latest agent query that just got rejected. Was your hook too edgy? Not edgy enough? As you walk through the front doors of the Anselm Society Digital Pub, you encounter a raucous conversation on the arts, faith, and whether Facebook ads are still worth it. Over in the corner table, two men are seated by the fire. One of them is trying to figure out if his book pitch has too much dinosaurs or not enough dinosaurs. That's me, your co-host, Matthew Mellema, and welcome to Believe to See, a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. The Anselm Society is a coalition of churches across the Front Range of Colorado dedicated to one simple goal, a renaissance of the Christian imagination. To further this goal, we do all sorts of things. Each spring, we have our big Imagination Redeemed conference, COVID permitting. And that conference attracts folks from all across the country. We have a regular slate of concerts, lectures, and other events, insert COVID permitting language, designed to foster love and understanding of arts and faith. And we have our own Guild of Artists right here in Colorado Springs. That's right, guilds still exist, and we have one. And when our guild is not creating art, some of us like to podcast. And that's how we get Believe to See. So to find out more about the Anselm Society, please visit us at anselmsociety.org. While you're there, check out our other two podcasts, Redeemed Imagination and Speaking with Joy. And since you're already doing stuff, why don't you rate and review our show on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts? I think I mentioned earlier, I've started doing this with the podcasts I listen to. It's super, super easy. It helps the podcast a lot. So go ahead and do it. Why not? You're already on your iPhone. And today's episode is one that I am very excited about for reasons that a lot of the listeners can probably guess. And so let me take you back in time to the Anselm Society Artist Retreat, which we just had a few weeks ago at Glen Erie Castle here in Colorado Springs. That's right. Colorado Springs has more castles than you'd think we should have. You'd think we should have zero. We have at least one, and that's a castle here in the foothills by Garden of the Gods. So we have our artist retreat, and I'm talking with Brian Brown, a couple of the other writers in the guild. And as we're talking, one of the things we discuss is, wow, these Green Ember books are doing really well. S.D. Smith seems to be doing really great work. How did he do this? It's all of us writers' dream. So like me, you all know about my dinosaur book that I've been pitching and writing my query letters and, dealing with rejection reasonably well. I mean, I go through a lot of potato chips that I sat eat, but I'm doing it reasonably well. But the point is, being a writer, being any sort of artist, it's really hard getting your work out there. It can be very frustrating. There's a lot of stuff. You always feel like you're not quite sure what you're doing. So I thought it would be great to hear a story of somebody who is a great friend of the podcast, great friend of Anselm, who's gone through a lot of this before us. And hey, he did it. People read the Green Ember books. People love them. He's doing this as his full-time job. So let's see if we can pick his brain. I'm sure he has like 5 surefire secrets that will work for everyone in all cases. I didn't ask him about this beforehand, but I'm sure that's the case. But you may know him better as S.D. Smith, the author of the Green Ember books, but around Anselm, we call him Sam Smith. So, Sam, how are you doing?
Hey, Matt, I am doing great. I have so many questions about that intro, but it took me places. I'll tell you that.
I like to bring my guests on a story, like take them on a journey.
Man, it's working. I'm telling you. You took me to Colorado, to the mountains, inside your twisted imagination. And also back in time, I felt like I was on AOL Instant Messenger going into like an RPG, like hangout on there where people are like swords and you had castles, you had a little inn and everything. And also, so that was cool. I was literally like just back in 1990 something. But then I was also so amazed by how you became a guy who went into the pub and then also saw yourself standing by the fire or sitting by the fire talking to another guy. And so I'm just amazed at you right now.
Well, I think for the pub thing, it's one of those like Marty McFly in Back to the Future where I saw myself and like the universe didn't explode. So that's good news.
What a relief.
Yeah, I always try to take my listeners on an RPG journey. Most people don't catch that, but I'm really glad you did.
Yeah, I don't want you to think I'm some kind of nerd or something, because what I used to do is, I don't know how old you are exactly. I don't know if you're quite as old as me, but I'm 43 years young. And we used to, the AOL Instant Messenger, like we would get on there and talk to our friends or whatever. And then there would be these rooms or something. And I did it probably like for a few weeks back in probably 95 or 96 or something. But I can remember we just used to go into these rooms and like joke around with people. Like we'd go into like the gardening experts room and pretend to be an expert and say like total nonsense and like give advice to people. But I had a couple of friends who were like super nerdier than I was at that time. And they would go into those like medieval sort of rooms and quaff ale and, you know, all that kind of stuff and have fights. And it was super fun.
I have found, you know, I've gone down a couple YouTube holes. One of them is for medieval weaponry and battle tactics. The other one's on various dinosaurs for book research purposes, everyone. Book research purposes. And I am just shocked by the things that those communities will just absolutely go to the barricades on and fight tooth and nail over. Like in the dinosaur realm, there's a huge argument over whether Tyrannosaurus had feathers. For what it's worth, I think he likely did, but I respect the views of the no feathers crowd. I want to make that clear. And then like over in the medieval weaponry, there's this huge debate about whether the Japanese katana or the European broadsword is a superior sword, which, oh man, don't go down that rabbit hole. It takes you to some weird places, let me tell you.
Well, I have experienced that one, or in just my sort of, as anyone who's probably read my books would probably understand, the very cursory knowledge of weaponry, but I try to just get by enough to conceal my ignorance from a 6-year-old. It's kind of that's sort of my standard. But yeah, I've heard that argument before, and I don't have a firm position. I know it's election season, but I need to kind of educate myself on the issues probably.
Yeah, I mean, you cannot go into this election undecided between the broadsword and the katana. You have to choose a side.
Yeah, I'm going no feathers and broadsword. I think I'm fully convinced of that. Mostly because you are pro feathers. I think that would add to the dramatic tension of this virtual nerd pub that we're in.
That's good. Really sharpen the debate for the podcast. So I'm kind of on the fence of katana versus broadsword, but heck, I'll go katana. So I'll be katana feathers.
Excellent. I think this interview is over. Sorry.
We've already gotten to the most important parts, but so
I just want to spend most of the time arguing with Chris Wallace, if that's possible. If I could do that, I think that would be ideal.
Really should have gotten him for the moderator of this podcast.
We didn't know it would be so heated.
Yeah, never talk about T-Rex feathers in polite company is what I found. But so, like I hinted at in my RPG introduction, you are a friend of Anselm. You've come to several conferences. You've been a speaker at a couple conferences. You've been on this podcast before. And we all at Anselm Society just, first of all, we love the Green Ember books to pieces. It's one of the most popular books if you want to just strike up a conversation with a random Anselm goer, talk to them about the Green Ember. But I'm just fascinated by how you do this. I obviously follow you on the various social media, and I'm just, as someone who is, several steps behind you on your writer journey, I'm looking, how do you do this? And is there any advice you have? And, like all of us flailing writers, like, let's learn from the Green Ember model. So let's start with, as any true story should, with the origin story. So just very basic question, like, how long have you wanted to be a writer, and what were your earliest writing attempts from back in the day?
Well, thanks, Matt, for this. This is cool. I am encouraged by your words, and yeah, I feel a lot of sense of community with you guys in Anselm, and I am rooting for all the artists involved there. So it's cool to just, every time I'm around you guys, I feel encouraged, and yeah, it's cool. It's so many interesting people, so many cool artists, and it feels like home to me. So that's very special. I can't remember the question now. Was it the origin? Oh yeah. How long?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I grew up in a holler in West Virginia. We don't even have, hollows. We have hollers. That's how sophisticated we are. So there are a lot of mountains out here. We're the mountain state, not quite Pikes Peak where your imaginary journeys begin there, but we have hills compared to you guys. They're warm hills. They're friendly hills. It's a beautiful state here, like Colorado Junior. We've got John Denver in common, I think. But,
that's true.
We should form a coalition with Tennessee and just have the John Denver allies. I think that would be a good secession policy. So I started out as a young child. I didn't really read very much. I wasn't a reader. I didn't know a lot of boys, a lot of males that read very much. My Papa did. He read a lot of poetry, and my dad read particularly a lot of like theology and the Bible. He was a Bible student, and he would read a lot of Christian books, and he kind of liked poetry too, and he was a painter as well. But I didn't know a lot of people my age, a lot of boys that read very much. That was kind of something that girls did, and it's just such a bummer to me now. But So I had this sort of conflicting thing, and I like sports and I like being, outside and playing and stuff. So I sort of was a typical West Virginia boy, I guess, in a lot of ways. I loved to play outside and play sports. That was kind of my main focus. But I always loved stories. I feel like what was happening was I was sort of haunted by the vocation of a storyteller from a very young age. Haunted in a good way. It is October, after all. But yeah, so stories like Star Wars and Star Trek and even like the Lone Ranger and stories. I just loved any kind of stories as a kid. I was just really, really into it. And I would go and play and act out those worlds, and I would sort of improvise on it, and I would make up my own worlds and stories. And so I was always creating things. We weren't super wealthy or anything, so I sort of make do with what toys we had. And we really had a charmed life in a lot of ways. I lived in a holler pretty far back in the woods. My dad was building a log cabin slowly over many years, and we lived in the basement of that log cabin when I was a child. And we actually never moved into the log cabin. My family, my dad and mom felt called to the mission field, and so we moved to Africa when I was 12. But before that, I just spent a lot of time playing in the woods, and it was a really exciting sort of canvas for my imagination. And I look back on it now and think of it as like as sort of, businesses talk about it. Everybody's got unfair advantages. Like, what's your unfair advantage? You grew up learning how to, your mom was a pastry chef, or your dad was a newspaper man or something. You have these unfair advantages that we don't often know about. And and part of what makes entrepreneurs successful is they sort of exploit those unfair advantages. And I think sort of what a lot of people would say, like, oh, that's not the best childhood in the world. It was really great in a lot of ways. Had loving parents and had this incredible scope for imagination. Had brothers to play with, and so I was a real imaginative kid who didn't read. And my mom read us. I can remember being in the basement, which is a pretty dark basement, but I can remember my mom reading the Chronicles of Narnia to us, and just feeling like my imagination was on fire. I could see it all, and I know a lot of us, I'm sure, in your audience have had this same experience of just feeling so much light and love and hope and joy in that experience. That just blew me away. I had a teacher who read Little Women to us when we were young, and I can remember at that time, anytime they read to us, I just loved it. I loved the Boxcar Children. I loved Lassie, Chronicles of Narnia, and those ones that really stick out to me. And then Little Women. I had a teacher, Miss Geiner, who read Little Women to us, and that was the first time I really realized that, because of what was happening with Joe, that's the first time I realized there are people who are writers, and that's a thing, and that just sort of, whoa. It's really fascinated with Joe, and found out that was sort of, Joe was really based heavily on Louisa May Alcott, so I became fascinated with Louisa May Alcott, and she's an American. She's like me, I didn't feel distant and far away and like something that's like out of a novel or out of a movie. I just thought, oh, that's like a normal person. So it became sort of humanized to me, the vocation of an author. And I thought, well, like, why would you do anything else? Like, that's the thing right there. So I started writing little stories, even as a young kid, even though I wasn't a reader. I mean, I could read, but I didn't read very much. And I started writing little stories about, I think they were kind of like Lassie knockoffs to begin with, and kind of Indiana Jones. And I still have one called The Great Space Race Interruption. And it was just a little like interstellar Olympics that's interrupted by a war between like people from Jupiter and Mars and Earth. And so I like that kind of thing. I always did that sort of thing. And in school, we had a teacher named Cammie McGraw, who was a missionary from Spain, and she was back, and she was teaching for a year at our school in West Virginia, and she was amazing. She made us write like whatever we want. She gave us like one page you had to write each week. And I wrote a story each week, and she was very like, Samuelito, you're a good writer. It's like, that built like confidence, and she was very encouraging, and I thought, oh, maybe I'm kind of good at this. So I always sort of carried a little bit of like, oh, I'm kind of a writer, but it didn't jive. I didn't know what that meant. It's still the idea of an author. I'd never met an author. I'd never seen an author. I'd heard of him, but it was like an astronaut or someone in the NBA. It was just something that was distant. I mean, probably the NBA probably felt closer. And that's what I acted. I was like, I play basketball all the time. I love basketball. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to play in the NBA. That would be my dream. My dream wasn't necessarily to be an author. My dream was play for West Virginia and then, go play for the Knicks and win the world championship. I was still kind of divided, I think. And then at some point, it sort of clicked, and I started to read more when I was a teenager. My oldest brother gave me a copy of Ender's Game, And
Mm.
that just blew me away. I thought, wow, reading is so fun. Like it was such a fun book, and I just absolutely loved it. And went from there to Tolkien and really into Lewis and poetry. And a friend took me to a Shakespeare to a play, The Tempest, at this outdoor college theater kind of a thing here in Southern West Virginia. And it was probably not, it wasn't the Royal Albert Hall, I'll tell you that, but it blew me away, and I was, holy cow, this is amazing. So I just got really into Shakespeare. So I kind of have like a caught up really quick, I think, by reading a lot as a late teenager, and sort of that just reshaped my world. But even so, I didn't think of myself, I will be a writer. I thought I was really into music. I loved Rich Mullins and Michael Card and Keith Green and people like that. And I thought, well, I like songwriting a lot. And I thought, well, I'll be a songwriter, and sort of pursued that for a long time. So when I sort of came crashing down, in a sense, I had a lot of health trouble, and I sort of was thwarted pretty heavily in the singer-songwriter world, not by really external forces, but mostly like just myself. I just struggled so much with my health, and that just got dashed. And I thought, well, what if I can't go anywhere? What if I'm just like limited and I'm sick or something? I'm home, and what can I do? I thought, well, I can still write. Even if I can't sing, because at that time I was having so much trouble with my throat, I was like, I can't, even if I can't sing, I can still write, I can write a story. And I sort of like went back to my old love of storytelling and the idea of being an author. And that's been in the last probably 15, 16 years. And that's what sort of started my very late in life sort of renaissance as recovering my love of storytelling. Boy, that was a long story. You still awake, Matt?
Oh, I am still awake, and there's actually a lot of stuff I wanted to comment on from that. First of all, shout out to the Boxcar Children. I grew up reading them too. I was jealous that they seemed to find mystery and hijinks everywhere they went, but I never did. But a couple things in particular that stood out. One of them, we can go into this more later, but I 100% agree with you on this stigma that still seems to be there that boys shouldn't be readers. And that's something I've been encountering, just trying to wade through the markets of YA and middle grade, seeing how all of it is marketed toward girls because girls are the readers. And that just bothers me. And we can talk more about that as we go along.
And all the jobs in publishing are all women too. There's hardly there's no men anywhere. That's hyperbole, but it's almost true. Yeah.
I mean, it absolutely yep, absolutely. So that's something I'd like to come back to in a bit. But also, I just love how different your background is, because I think a lot of times when authors tell their personal stories, like, well, I grew up as a reader. I read everything I could. I wrote my first novella when I was 11 years old and blah, 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 blah. And you seem to come across as like you're an imaginative kid. You love stories, but you kind of came later to the reading and writing game. And I think that's really fascinating. It shows there's multiple paths to get to where you want to be.
Yes, totally agree. I feel like I'm unusual in that sense, but I agree with that point of like people who, I don't know, you've probably seen these things where they show like Samuel L. Jackson got his first job as an actor at age 42 or I can't remember what it actually is, but there's all these things about people sort of starting late. And I do kind of believe that it's never too late.
Yeah.
On a dream.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's pick up the story now. You talked about how you started, rediscovering how you wanted to be a writer after some other different paths took you there. So this is probably a part of your story you've told a lot. So I apologize in advance. But for all the folks in the audience who maybe haven't heard of it, what inspired you to write the Green Ember series in particular?
So at some point I was like, I'm going to write a novel. And for writers out there, it's almost like a big bugaboo that you have to get out of the way. It's sort of you're writing your first book and you're getting all the way through it and writing the end. It's a big deal. And I did that. I wrote a book called Shadwell, and I'm actually looking at the place where I wrote it right now with naked eyes, and kind of remembering the challenge of that. So I was writing some other things I'd written, and I think I was in the middle of writing my third sort of story, my third novel. The first two I think were not very good, and this one was out. I was enjoying this, but there had been another story that I'd been telling my kids. My oldest daughter was a toddler at the time, and we were on the porch, and there were rabbits hopping around in the yard. It was kind of just story time. I used to tell her a lot of stories. Had a few different little serials going with her, one about a little dog named Chance, one about a girl with golden wings. And this, I thought, well, should I tell her like the next story? I never planned any of it. It was always just spontaneous. But I thought, no, I'll tell her a story about these little rabbits hopping around the yard. And so I did, and it was about an older sister because she was an older sister, had a baby brother. And so that story I told her that day, she just really loved it. And it kind of grew, and her little baby brother came into the picture too. And so this story about these characters, initially they were called Hannah and Joe, which was really close to my kids' names, Anne and Josiah. But eventually, it wasn't too long before I wanted to change their names because I didn't want them to feel like I was sort of aiming. What if Joe was acting like a pain, I didn't want my son to think, oh, he's talking about me. So we changed their names, kind of gave them some distance, and they became less moralistic. When they first started out, they were really simple little stories. So so they got more broad in scope and more adventurous and less less any kind of connection to like a didactic or anything. So that grew with them, and all around our house, we would on walks at bedtimes and just on the porch, wherever we would tell them stories about the rapids at Jupiter's Crossing. That's what we called the stories. In my computer right here, the files for all the Green Ember stories are in a file called The Rabbits at Jupiter's Crossing. That's what the story was for us, and we just kind of keep going, and it got what became the climax of the Green Ember happened about 50 yards from where I'm standing right now, and it was under what my kids called the step tree because the roots sort of look like steps. And then we were right underneath the step tree talking, and this sort of climactic moment happened, and we were all sort of stopped, and we all looked at each other, and it was kind of silent, and I was thinking in my mind, that was pretty amazing. And they said the same thing. So that was like my first sort of moment of getting that kind of feedback of like, wow, that was special. That was really special. And the kids just said, Daddy, you've got to write that down. You've got to share that. You've got to write a book. So they convinced me, and I did. And I thought actually did what you're not supposed to do when you're writing. And that is I stopped writing a book. I was about 40,000 words into a novel called The Secret of the Valley. And I stopped writing that, and I started writing The Green Ember. And I thought, well, this will be like a, best case scenario, maybe some people like it. Worst case scenario, it's just like a little artifact of this time we had together as a family. And they can, their kids and grandkids and people can say, oh, that was crazy old Grandpa Sam. He was he's just this amateur storyteller, and we have this thing, and sort of gathering dust on our bookshelves. So I thought that might really happen. But part of me thought, I don't know, there's something special between us. And I wasn't sure how many other families would be out there like us. And what we found is there's way more than we expected.
Yes, so that's fascinating because I always wonder with these sort of things where does it go from like, oh, that's a nice story that, me and my kids have together to like, oh, I should write this down and share it for other people. And that's interesting to hear your account of that. So as you get going, developing the story, it starts coming together. I'm wondering what your next steps are. Like, and this maybe applies to the previous books that you wrote too. Was your plan to go to traditional publishers? Was your plan always to, self-publish, do some different route? How did you see that playing out in your head as it starts coming together?
It was all on the table. Just like everybody else at the beginning, when I first finished that first book, Shadwell, I thought, oh, this is a good book. And I was learning like everybody else at the time, I was learning about self-publishing and just reading about that. And it had a pretty significant stigma to it. And I thought, well, I initially thought that's not what I want to do. And so I did the thing where I sent out some query letters. I don't think I ever really had any. I remember having two really positive feedback things from people who rejected the book and just giving me some good insight. And I think I was so much more sensitive at the time then. I needed to get some lumps. I needed to get some rejection. I needed to get tougher. And I think that early on that happened. So I did sort of explore that world. I can't remember too well how all the details of that, but I do remember trying to, spending the time looking around, thinking, oh, do I have to get writers? The big guide to all the agents, a big fat book. We used to have things called books in the world. And I remember looking through there, and I hated that process so much, and I didn't, I still feel intimidated by that. But going back to the sort of the unfair advantage thing, what I did have was a brother-in-law who had been working in publishing for a long time. And it was like small scale sort of stuff. But he is so talented. His name's Andrew, and he's just a brilliant guy, Canadian fellow that our family met when my parents, after they left Africa, they went to Puerto Rico for a little while to help minister to naval families. And there was a deaf school there that had a lot of Canadians, missionaries, and the church and the deaf school kind of worked together a lot. And one of my brothers, my older brother Will, met his wife there at the deaf school, and my baby sister Rebecca met her husband Andrew at the deaf school there. So you got to find a bunch of hillbillies from West Virginia holler who lived in Africa a long time. Suddenly they're in Puerto Rico getting married to Canadians. It's a real adventure.
All right. I really like what you were saying about the unfair advantage things, because I think if most of us think about it, we have some sort of unfair advantage going. So yours, you said, is your brother-in-law who had some publishing experience. How did that experience help you get going with that?
Well, he's sort of like a polymath, or he's just a brilliant kind of a guy. He's just really good at a lot of things. And so it wasn't just the publishing. He was great at that too. But we met when he was a little, I was probably 16, 17 or 18 or so. I can't remember, something around then. He was younger. He was like 14, 13, connected over music, and we both loved the Lord. We loved Jesus, and we sort of just became good buddies. And, years later, he married my sister, and we always sort of talked about, he would like to start like a little publishing company. And I thought, I want to be an author. So we kind of dreamed up co-writing. And I think when it was time to go, he just had a lot of the expertise that I didn't have. So I feel like you often find that in a lot of different kinds of businesses. You have people who are partners, they're Arthur and Merlin, or they're Kirk and Spock. You just find different kinds of people that working together, they sort of make up for each other's weaknesses. And of course, I think you find that in marriage too, and a lot of different sort of relationships in the created order. You find a lot of different sort of complementary relationships. It's just like, I'm bad at this, I'm good at this. And that can be really beautiful and poetic, or it can be really practical. And we just had that. Me and Andrew, sort of like I was good at some things and he was kind of good at everything. So he's like this diamond in the rough, so he just knew what to do. A lot of the stuff that I knew I couldn't do with self-publishing, I didn't have a patience or appetite, or I didn't have maybe, I don't know, really probably what it is. I probably didn't have the determination to do that kind of thing, because I do think I could have and can, but it was such a gift that he did that side of it. He really worked on the publishing side. So it was kind of like a self-publishing kind of thing, but it was also sort of like we started a small press, and he was really adept at it. And he was excellent at making it sort of a high quality thing, which I think has always been part of what we've tried to do. And that's a lot to do with him. I think we both had good taste, but he had the ability to execute on that. And it was a really powerful, he was just a really powerful partner to have. And we had limitations too. And that's the thing, is like, you can think, oh, well, of course, it would be really nice if you had that. You can, even some of the things that you might think of as a bug in your operating system of your life might be a feature. I think if you examine it, I think, like I mentioned earlier, being sort of in a rural area, I'm not in the artistic capital of the world. I don't live in Nashville or Charlotte or even Colorado Springs or LA or New York or Boston, it's not a cultural center. It's not Austin. there aren't people who are doing this kind of work all over the place. So you think of that, that's a major disadvantage. And no connections. I didn't have a lot of people who didn't immediately have like a massive network of people to kind of connect to, and in any real sense. And honestly, some of the little bit that I did have was a source of like major disappointment, actually, because I felt like I didn't experience sort of some of the support that I expected from some of the communities I was actually involved with. So it wasn't ideal. It wasn't perfect by any means, but I think some of those things made for a creative experience that was really valuable. I think a lot of that went into shaping the kind of writer that I would be in ways that I think ended up being positive, even though they felt like massive obstacles to me at the time. But Andrew did make things easier. Andrew is fantastic. He's a great guy. The only limitations we had at the beginning, and have had ever since, is that Andrew has always been working other jobs, and he still does to this day. And just, I think someday I would love to have Andrew working full time with me, because he is unbelievable and he's fantastic. But I've always had like a quarter or a tiny fraction of his energy, and that's been enough to help a whole lot, for sure.
Yeah, so I like the way you frame that, because when you first started your answer and you're talking about your brother-in-law who's in publishing, I'm like, well, that's just great. I don't have a brother-in-law in publishing. My brother-in-law is just a youth pastor. That's no help. So, but like you said, that's offset by other, advantages and disadvantages that you had. And I imagine you would say that even if you have, an Andrew on your side, that's not the silver bullet that solves all your problems. Just one advantage you have that it seems like you learned how to turn to your advantage with this. So I guess my follow-up question is, when do you and Andrew start talking about your own small publishing house? Like, is this once Green Ember starts going? Did you try to do that with your earlier novels? Did something shift? What made you go from, sending out the queries for the traditional publishers to saying, let's just start our own small thing?
Well, I should probably qualify a little bit. When I say Andrew worked in publishing, he would typeset for a tiny vanity Christian self-publisher up in Canada that nobody ever heard of. So he's completely disconnected from the New York publishing, or even Christian publishing, or even traditional publishing in any way. So it sounds a little more grander. He just knew how to, basically that's a way of saying he knew how to do stuff related to making books. But yeah, I don't know. At some point, I think I kind of got a vision for Storywarn. I got a vision for this site and this community that could serve kids. I thought that's right where I was. I had young kids, and I thought, boy, there's this whole disconnect between in the art world or in literature and music. It felt like there was this big chasm between sort of what the Christian world was creating that was sort of safe for the whole family.
Yeah.
In what I deemed as sort of a dangerous way. And then you had some really toxic stuff on the other side. You're watching some kind of award show, and there was a really popular singer, someone who's really popular with the youth. And it was basically it was like a satanic worship service, at the VMAs or something. And I was this is it was unbelievable. It was just mainstream. And I thought, pornography is becoming more mainstream and sort of mixing with a lot of the media stuff that's even aimed at kids. And I just thought, holy cow, this is I know this is toxic, and I don't want to just be a reactionary fundamentalist, some kind of someone who's scared of culture. I don't really feel like that's me, but I'm also that's really bad. And that's not good for kids. It's not good for me. And so I just felt sort of that there's this gap between there. And I know a lot of people are aware of that. And a lot of people are speaking into that. And Anselm, exists so much because of that gap. And so I'm so grateful for you guys. But I was sort of seeing that. And so it was a part of a little bit of a broader cultural sort of view of saying, we're going to try to come in and be allies in imagination for parents. We're going to try to come alongside and say, no, here's some good stuff out there, and here we'll help. We'll connect people to people like Sally Lloyd-Jones or Andrew Peterson or Randall Goodgame and Slugs and Bugs. And there is stuff there. And so we'll try to connect. And then we'll be more than just a connection point, which is a lot of people seem like they want to do the connection point stuff. We wanted to be more than just people who were going to sort of curse the darkness. We wanted to light a candle. We wanted to create. And that was sort of really close to my heart. So Andrew and I had been sort of scheming along those lines. And initially we were going to start this Storywarn Press, and our initial goal was to publish lots of different authors. And so we sort of did that together, and we thought, well, we'll publish something of mine at some point. But we really didn't want to do, because we were that's too on the nose, it's too we're going to start it and then we're going to do it ourselves. We really wanted to publish other people. But meanwhile, I was writing the Green Ember, and I felt it felt special to me in a lot of ways. And Andrew read it. Andrew loved it. He's the one that said, no, I don't read a lot of what's hot right now. I've never been really aware too much of what's going on in the market. But Andrew reads like crazy. So he said, no, this is really good. This is fine. This is better than a lot of stuff that's being published. And I didn't have anything to measure that by. So he really believed in it. And he was like, no, we should publish this now. And I felt, oh, no, I think we should publish somebody else first. But basically we didn't have anything else, and we wanted to do it. We were ready to roll. And so let's just do it. And we did it with fear and trembling. So it was kind of there was no master plan as far as I think we'll create some kind of a hit. And we didn't have any. We were so terrified when we printed. We did a Kickstarter, and I think it was $10,000 we were trying to get. And we already, before that even happened, we'd already gone to the printer and printed a bunch. And I was just so scared that we wouldn't reach the goal. And then I thought, so, we got through that, and people were really supportive. It really surprised me. We got past the $10,000, I think, in the first 24 hours. Meanwhile, no one's ever read anything I've written. in fiction. So that was just like goodwill, and that blew me away. And I think we ended up at the time doing, I don't know, I think it was like $20 some thousand, and that was just great. And it was all good. Really good start. That was like family, inside sort of network of people that sort of knew our family or knew us. And that was mostly just kind of our little circle or whatever. And then I think we had a lot more books to sell, but we were just like, we're never going to sell these. Andrew was like, well, if we can sell these 1,500 books in 18 months, then we'll break even and we'll be okay. And I'm not making a lot of money at all. So I'm scared. I'm like a dad with young kids. I'm working 2 jobs. I'm just like so nervous about that. It seems funny to me now, but I was like, I will never sell 1,500 books. That would just be insane. So we gave ourselves this year and a half, and we were really, really nervous about it. But anyway, I think those sold in like the next month or so. And it was just sort of like from there, it just was a different story. And it became so, I remember what was really weird was at the beginning, at our store and then the Kickstarter, I saw I just recognized all these names. And then if there were like a review or something, I recognized names. And then it was really early on, I started seeing other names. And I thought, what is going on here? Who is that? That's not Uncle Jim, or, that's not my friend Bob, or that's somebody. And it just kept going and going. And I was so scared. I thought, oh no, when people that don't know me start reviewing the book on Amazon, it's going to be brutal. And I literally thought at one point, my mom is inventing Amazon accounts, and she's going in there and she's really creative. She's coming up with all these, and I literally thought that was probably there was some kind of conspiracy of kindness, for the people that love me, that were just trying to encourage me. And eventually I was like, well, even they can't keep up with that. So it got going. And it's funny. The sad part is we sort of had to abandon our idea of starting a little press because we could barely keep up with what we were doing at the time. So basically we just backed into it. We were sort of took a detour and ended up where we did. It was not a genius master plan by any means.
Well, I appreciate how that is framed, because a lot of times you'll see authors have their life plan. It's, it flows really nice in a slide presentation and it seems very linear from one point to another. Also, I just want to commend you for your phrase, safe for the whole family, but in a dangerous way. I think that's a very true thing that you just said. So I guess you were talking about me painting the picture for the opening scene. I like how you painted the picture of you decided to print these books. You paid for them. You get some money from your sort of, in more inner circle folks. And you have to sell them. What do you do next? That's the part that I think a lot of artists look at that well, what do you do? Do I buy ads? Do I go places? Do I, go down to the bookstore with all my books and see if I can sell them to them? That just seems so daunting. How did you and your brother-in-law approach that?
Well, just backing up a little bit, I will say that just the Green Ember manuscript, the book that came out there's almost no way it should have even happened. The actual writing of the book took me about a year and a half, and it was probably 8-9 months of actual writing, but I had to stop halfway through. My dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. I was going through some intense health struggles myself. I didn't think I was going to be well at all. I was very, very concerned. I was in a rough spot sort of mental health wise during a lot of that, which probably is somewhat understandable given sort of some other circumstances with my dad and other things going on. I was really, really busy, working very hard, volunteering at church, volunteer soccer coach. I was just a really young kid. So it was a chaotic time, totally chaos. So the Green Ember itself, I think now about when I wrote Ember Rising years later, which was the first book. I don't want to jump ahead in the story too much, but first book I wrote after I quit my job. That experience compared with the experience of writing the Green Ember was total night and day, completely different experience. And when I wrote that, I thought, oh my goodness, this is what it's like to actually have a little bit of breathing space to write. And I enjoyed that book. I think it's a good book. But it's almost how did the Green Ember even happen? So I don't say that to sort of indulge and, feel so sorry for me. What a heroic story. I just mean to say, if you're going through that, you just never know. You don't know. I firmly believe that babies come after labor pain. Like that something beautiful is birthed from difficulty. That's how the world is. It feels like to me. When something doesn't cost you anything, I don't know, man. I don't trust it as much, and I just feel like it doesn't resonate. So I think that if you're thinking like, oh, well, he had this and this is this, everything just clicked for him, I'll just back up a little bit and just say, no, there was so much pain. And I would just say, like, people who want to, I hear a lot of people say, I want to do what you did. I want to be like you. I want to do the path that you, I would just say, like, do not do that. Please don't. You do not want it. And I think the more you are aware of other people's story, like I've gotten a chance to meet some people who are like, I don't know, musicians you might hear on the radio or authors you might see on some kind of bestseller list. Like, I would not trade with them. I wouldn't trade with any of them because my pain is mine. And I just think like, and again, that's another thing that you think like, oh, that's a big deficit. It's a big demerit. It's a big obstacle against you. Like, there's a book by Ryan Holiday, which I think is about stoicism. I've not read it, but it's called The Obstacle is the Way. I'm not a stoic, but I kind of believe that there's something about that. And so I would just say, like, just backing up, like, just to make sure that your audience, can hear that, man, it's, I don't think anything beautiful comes without some sacrifice. I think there's a cross before a crown. So I'll just say that the struggle is real, as the cliche says. There was a major struggle, major difficulty in giving birth to the Green Ember itself. So now should I answer your question, since I just didn't answer your question for 5 minutes?
Hey, it was a helpful prologue. So you got the prologue, and now you're ready to go forward to the question.
Okay. And now I will ignore your question for another 20 minutes. So what do you do? Like, okay, so I believe this. John Lasseter, who has had mixed reviews in recent years, but dude knows how to tell a story. He said that quality is the best business plan. So I think it's important for introverted, nervous, creative types like myself who may struggle with anxiety or different things, like, to get out there and to show and to care about connection, to care about creation and connection, to have the humility it takes to sell yourself, to talk about it, to get out there and to stand behind your work and to back yourself and to do. I think it's so important for us as people who are really scared of that to go and do it. I think that's a way of being generous. It's a way of being hospitable. So I think I did that some. We did the Kickstarter. We went out, in public, so to speak. We went public with it. I remember Tolkien said that after there's a quote which I'm going to get a little bit wrong, but he basically said that I'm dreading the publishing of The Lord of the Rings. He said, I've exposed my heart to be shot at. And I think we all feel that way. We all feel that terror of being shot at. When you release a book, when you share it, everything's easy until then. It's easy to be an introvert and sit on the sidelines and just sort of like talk about how bad the people in the game are doing. Oh my goodness, I would have run the ball there. I would have done this, and all the refs are, whatever. It's so easy to do that. It's easy to be a spectator. It's so hard to be in the game. And I just think, like, introverts, creative types, weirdos like me, like, we've got to get in the game. And I think that, so part of the beginning, like, psychological struggle was like just saying yes to getting in the game. And if you're like me, a part of me wanted to, but I was so scared. And it remains sort of that way. It's a lot duller now, definitely. Like, getting a bad review or feedback, it's a lot duller now. But I just think that bravery, first of all, to put yourself out there. And going back to the John Lasseter quote, like, there's nothing replaces quality. Like, so every chance you can get, like, we tried to build it into everything. We had a really good illustrator. If you're self-publishing, cover is, any kind of publishing, cover is so important. Cover art, because it's just, we do judge books by covers. You do all the time in, like, every area of life. And so try to get yourself a tryout. I think of it, I'm such a sports person, but I think of it as like what happened with Andrew and with Zach Franzen, who did our cover art, and Brian Patton, who helped us do a video for our Kickstarter. Like, they were pros and they were really good at it, and they were real close friends, which was, again, a blessing that I can't, like, count to my credit, but they were just there. The Lord provided for me in that way. But all of them cared about quality. So I feel like what all those people did is they, like, fought through the security at the Cleveland Browns tryout facility and, like, made the way. And then they're like, hey, here's a little skinny white dude from West Virginia, and he's a great punt returner. Give him a chance. And they're like, okay, we'll give him a chance. But then you got to play. And the playing part, all those other advantages and trying things, difficult things, that's all about getting a tryout. The playing part is, like, it has to be good. It has to be, so if I could say one thing, it would be like, build into your quality, build into your work, do the work, like, take the long cut. become the kind of person who, if you get a tryout, which a tryout for us is, as writers, is like readers. And then that's when the rubber hits the road. There's all the obstacles, like will the query letter and will the agent and will the publisher, or will I be able to do? But at some point, Lord willing, if you keep trying, you will get a tryout with an audience. And my biggest thing is it's got to be good. And then it's like there's a lot of, what most people call luck or providence, whatever, like involved in how it all shakes out. And I know for a fact I am not a better writer than lots of people I know who are less sort of quote unquote successful. I have no doubt about that. So then it's a lot about like what people are hungry for, what people want, what's lacking, how it hits them, But once you get that tryout, caring about quality is really, really important. And in a world where there are so much conflicting truths, like a nuance, I think it's so important for writers, and especially as it approaches business and stuff, to hold things in intention. And one of those things is that, like, you have to build into quality, but you can't be paralyzed by perfectionism. So you have to go before you're ready too. Like that's true at the same time. Like you can't wait forever. So a lot of us are like, that's an easy way of staying in the crowd. Like, oh, I would do this. I would do that. I would have run, a bootleg there or whatever. You can't do that all day. At some point you got to play. You got to get in the game. So I think holding those things and caring a lot about creation, more about creation than anything. And then also caring about connection and saying, I'm going to go and I'm going to connect to people and I'm going to have the humility it requires to say, I'm here. I wrote this. I think you should read it because I think it's good. And I wrote it as an act of hospitality, an act of generosity to you as an audience. And I would just think, like, thinking very specifically about it. I think that's a big advantage for what we did, was that this was I wrote this for my kids. And so I wrote this with a lot of love and a lot of honesty, a lot of sincerity, a lot of hospitality. So I think people pick up on that. I think when they read it, that's there. And I think the various sort of adventure of my life shaped me into at least a decent storyteller, enough to be able to convey this adventure. And I think people have just resonated with it. And I can't take a lot of credit for that. I think it's just like the way that the Lord shaped my life. And I think you've got a story too that will resonate with some audience. Like, and it may be, it might be Disneyland, or it might be like a rural country garden, but it's like your territory. And I think if you are focused on loving those people, tending that garden, and most of us are not going to be called to build Disneyland. Most of us are going to be like tilling the garden in our backyards. Like that's most writers' experience. And maybe one's bigger than another, but like it's pretty modest in the big scheme of things. Almost no one knows about my writing. Like that's the facts of the world. Like almost nobody. But I feel like I'm having a successful time, having a good time. Mm-hmm. But like almost nobody. It's like totally insignificant in the big sort of scheme of the art of the world or whatever. But it's not insignificant to those people who love it. Yeah. It matters to them, matters to those kids. So I've gone on long enough, but I would just say, I don't know if there's a strategy that's like get Facebook ads, all that stuff works, but the heart of it is like you have to care and you have to love and you have to build something that's special. And then show up. The ways to show up are going to be different at different times. It's going to be Facebook. It's going to be whatever the next thing is. I don't know. But I think that more important than sort of the technique is sort of like your approach and how you're thinking as an author, like who you're becoming. Yeah.
I think I speak for a lot of the writers and other artists who listen to this when you were talking about, you need to make sure that it's quality. When you get the chance, you need to make sure it's the best you can make it. We're like, yes, quality. Yes, we love quality. But then when you added the other part, like, but you can't let perfectionism get in the way. It's just like, no, I love perfectionism because it's an excuse not to go forward with things. The struggle is real. But yeah, it's the balance of having the quality and putting yourself out there. I suspect most of us who are the sort of person who would write a book, again, quality, yes, but the putting yourself out there, like my little introvert's heart, like, oh no, I know he's right, but oh no. But yeah, that's, your points are very much taken and I will be pondering them later today. So we're running a little short on time, but like finally, but before we get to your latest book, which is just about to come out in a month or so, maybe you could just take us through a day in your life like now. So what does your day look like? How much time do you spend writing? How much time do you spend, COVID permitting, traveling to places, doing social media? What does a day look like for you now?
Well, I will just offer the caveat that I am one of those sort of creative type people who doesn't like keep track of time very well or like percentages. So I'm so terrified that it's like my answers on all this stuff, even history kind of stuff, will be so inexact. Yeah, I'm positive it'll be inexact. I'm not terrified. I'm certain of it. But I'm trying to be as honest as I can with the limitations of my person. Yeah, it does vary quite a bit. I do, like right now I'm in my office, which is called The Forge. It's like 20 feet from my house. It was like a garden shed. We got it fixed up a little bit, but it's just kind of a little small, little modest place to work. And when I'm writing a book, I'm out here. I'll write for, I don't know, a few hours. I usually have some kind of a goal. Like I'll try to write. And I usually set it pretty modest. So if I'm I'll maybe want to write it like 1,000 words or something. If I write 1,000 words, then I feel like, oh, you did it. If you do that every day, you're good. But then I'm not super religious about that. That's not really the thing that motivates. It's mostly like getting there and sitting down. Then the word count doesn't really, I just kind of write what I need to write that day. And sometimes it's 3,000 or 4,000 words. Sometimes it's 1,000. It's not, but that's something like when I'm writing, like the last couple of weeks, I haven't been writing anything, which is probably telling in my mental health. Genuinely, I feel like I'm so much of a better husband and a better churchman and a better neighbor when I'm writing a book more than like when I'm trying to sort of sell a book, which is what I'm doing now. We just opened a pre-order for my latest book. And so I've been doing a lot of stuff with that. We're trying to figure out like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do in our store and how are we going to share it and that kind of thing. And that is like a drain on me. That's tougher. Like I'm just like a lot of authors. I'd love to just be able to write all day and let somebody else fool with it. But again, that's a fantasy and it's a self-indulgent, self-important, selfish sort of fantasy. So I'm trying to not indulge in it so much, but so it's just different. Seasons are different. But in an ideal sort of normal thing, I would be writing some, every day, and I'd like write some in the morning and then maybe do some like email. And I'm trying to get better at like, I read Deep Work recently, Cal Newport's book, and just more and more convicted that I'm wasting a lot of time on email and different things that and I need to have more time set aside for just intense getting lost in sort of the narrative. And I've got to have momentum. Like it's got to be day on day. So when I write a book, it's going to be like, I'm going to write for say 90 days and like 85 of them I'm going to write in. One of those is going to be a Sunday where we went to church and took the day off and spent time with the family. And one of them is going to be something happened and had to go to the hospital to visit somebody, but I'm going to try to, because if I let too many days go, then I lose the narrative. So I try to stay in it, try to stay in the world. I think the writing is better for that. It's easier. So I'll do that a lot of the day, and I'll handle business for, a couple hours or something. And I'll try to do something physical every day too. And I've been doing better about that. Take a walk. I usually actually start my day that way. So because writing is such a sedentary vocation and it's so isolating, it's different than even like acting or filmmaking with these or animation or something that's a big collaborative sort of work. It's so novel writing is so isolating. And people who already struggle they're already introverts, they might already struggle with anxiety or depression, that kind of thing, that can compound that. And so exercise is so important for that. Is exercise so good for mental health? And again, it's a lot of things that people who were introverted, maybe like they weren't good at sports, so they feel like intimidated by physical. So there's a lot of like things going against us in those kinds of things. And plus it just takes work. But I think I'm more creative when I'm doing some kind of exercise, even if that's just like taking a walk to break up the day. So that's part of the day. And then when I'm on the road, I'm supposed to be on the road. I'm supposed to be on the road all this year. I'm supposed to be doing a tour, like concert. I haven't done that at all this year. I haven't been on the road. So I'm someone who doesn't like to, I'm a homebody, again, introverted kind of thing. I like being home a lot. I love my family. I love being around here. Love West Virginia. But when I go, I love it. I love being in Colorado. I love being in California or Florida or Ohio. I love being there. I love meeting people, but like my natural tendency would be like hole up in the cave, But that's sort of a flavor of my days. I feel like it's really important to be connected to community and more than just creative community, connected to ordinary people of different vocations. I'm not an elite person in my community. I'm like another guy at church who, helps set up and tears down. I'm not I think it's really important for artists to sort of cultivate humility and cultivate an attitude of generosity and hospitality and not as like a cultural elite sort of vibe. And that's probably maybe easier to do in a place like West Virginia. There's a big ethic of, don't get too big for your britches.
Yeah.
But I think that's so I'm trying to be just like a dad and a neighbor and a faithful person in my church and in my community. So I think that's important. The world doesn't revolve around me and my art. I'm a part of it. I'm a part of the community.
Yeah.
I want to be faithful in showing up for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that is important too, because I think a lot of artists have this dream of like, okay, maybe one day I can reach a point where I'm just, in my log cabin in the woods. I'm sipping my hot cocoa. I write the draft, send it to the publisher, and all the little publishing elves take care of it from there. But that simply is not the way the world works. And maybe it shouldn't be the way the world works. So there's just other stuff comes along. And yeah, like you said, it's not the whole of life. It is a part of life. And there's a lot more stuff to keep in mind than just sitting in all of our artist hovels, even though how we would really like to be in the artist hovels sometimes.
Well, and Matt, I'll just say too that it won't solve your problems.
Yeah.
I'm just saying from a little bit of experience, like, oh, he's done it. He's got the dream. Like, yeah, that's true. I'm living a life right now that I dreamed about for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still hard and it's still difficult. And I still have the same problems with sin. And it's like I have new opportunities for sin. And I have like some new opportunities for being generous and giving gifts too. But I'm the same guy. And the problems that I'm just going to say, wherever you are, if you don't address like what's going on with you anyway, like again, for a lot of us who are writers, it's like mental health stuff. Like some of us need to go to therapy. Some of us need to start exercising. Some of us need to, get over ourselves or cultivate humility or get reconnected to our church. And, we need to you won't do the thing you're supposed to do once you become successful or whatever. It just exacerbates a lot of those things. So I would just say be who you're going to be. And trust God for the growth of whatever your ministry is, whatever your work is, whatever your vocations are, and do your best. I'm just saying hustle. It's great. Yeah. Try to be a full-time author. It's fantastic. I love it, but it doesn't solve your self-worth or what. You don't suddenly think, well, you just get new ones. You get new reasons to think you're inferior. Instead of comparing yourself to, Joe Schmo who got a book deal or whatever, now you're comparing yourself with the next people. And so it's you're always still struggling with envy. So if you think, oh, if I just got a book deal or if I just was able to go full time as an author, that won't solve the problems. It just doesn't. It will not. And you know that, but I'm just telling you it doesn't. I'm just saying, believe that. The part of you inside that says I know that's true. It's 100% true. In fact, it takes away some of energy and some opportunities in a way that I would again, keep creating and go create another thing. If you make something and it doesn't go, so to speak, don't stop, keep making things because you'll need that sort of that reservoir built up, when things start to go. So keep making things and with a hopeful expectation. Don't go sour. It might be your most productive time. In a weird way. I've heard a lot of people say that, and I don't know if it's exactly true, but just don't stop. If you feel called to it, it's important to keep making, even in the time when you're not when you haven't made it, even while you haven't made it, make, create.
Great. I think that's a great way to put a bow on that conversation. I think that's really good word to hear because like you said, a lot of us, I was like, well, if this could happen, then everything would be solved. If this could happen, it'll be solved. But that's not the way it works. You're the same person, and there's no magic bullet in terms of career success to do that. And I thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, we are winding down with time. Before we go, I do want to mention to the readers and listeners, I guess listeners, but they're also readers. You do have a new book coming out in about a month, The Archer's Cup, part of the Green Ember Archer series. So again, if you're out there listening, if you're the sort of person who likes Anselm, what we do, and you have kids, someone who has kids, or you just want a good story, really do check these out. I enjoy these. I am so looking forward to when my son's almost old enough to start on these. So I'm really looking forward to that. But you want to tell us just a little bit about where we are with the Archer's Cup before we go?
Sure. It's the 9th book in sort of the big Green Ember series, overarching books. There are 4 big Green Ember books, but this is this story follows a side character. And it sort of mirrors the main Green Ember series. So if people have enjoyed like the Green Ember and Ember Falls and Ember Rising and Ember's End, which came out earlier this year, then you might enjoy The Last Archer, The First Fowler, and now The Archer's Cup, which sort of parallel the series, but they're different adventures, and you don't have to know a whole lot about what's going on with other stuff. If you were kind of curious, like where it fits in, you can go to my website at sdsmith.com/FAQ, and there's a sort of a recommended reading list. But I like the book. It's one of the smaller books, but it's the biggest of the smaller books. It's about twice the size of any of the other little ones, and it's almost kind of almost like the size of Ember Falls. So it's longer, more time to develop stuff. It's a little bit of a mystery. So it's a departure in some ways from what I've done in the past in the Green Ember series, but it's still sort of got the same heart and soul. So I'm really excited about it. It's my coronavirus. It's my pandemic book. I wrote it instead of being on tour this year. So I hope it's good.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. I found this super helpful, super interesting. I'm sure a lot of the folks in the audience will too. And again, people listening, check out the Green Ember books, sdsmith.com. And yeah, as you can probably tell now, listeners, things are winding down at the Anselm Digital Pub. Fire is down to embers. The customers are trundling home, and you've polished off your final glass. Once again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anselm Society. Rate and review us if you get the chance. And thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time.